Come on, Mike, move the camera to me. Em's not trying to be on camera right now. Good evening and welcome to Story Hour. I'm tonight's host, Laura Blackwell. My co-host, the marvelous Daniel Marcus, started Story Hour nigh on 4 years ago. And we've just been coming back pretty much every Wednesday because we're having so much fun. We have had some help. We do have a Givers Fund grant from SIFWIP, which we are very grateful for. That really is helping a lot with keeping the Zoom going and all the subscriptions that we need for this. And, we've also had a lot of help from some fantastic writers. We've got another two of them today. Today, we are happy to welcome back M. Shaw and to welcome Corey Farrenkopf in his Story Hour debut. If you are joining us on Zoom, feel free to join the text chat. Just chat all you like. If you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to leave messages. We may not read them right away, but we will read them later and we will treasure them. I promise. So let's go ahead and get started with our first reader. Our first reader tonight is Corey Farrenkopf. Corey Farrenkopf lives on Cape Cod with his wife, Gabrielle, and works as a librarian. His short stories have been pronounced in Vestarian, Smokelong Quarterly, The Southwest Review, Reckoning, Flash Fiction Online, Bourbon Pen, and elsewhere. His debut novel, Living in Cemeteries, will be published by Journal Stone in April of 2024. That is next month. He is the fiction editor for the Cape Cod Poetry Review. To learn more, follow him on Twitter at Corey Farrenkopf or on TikTok at Corey Farrenkopf or on the web at coreyfarrenkopf.com. One thing that's really useful if you're listening to this and not watching is knowing how to spell Corey Farrenkopf, which is C-O-R-E-Y, last name Farrenkopf. Gotta be great to have a name with K-O in it. Corey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura, and thank you so much for hanging out, Em. It's so excited to hear you read after this, and thanks for letting me read first. As I said, I get very nervous sometimes, and I am glad to get to read. Yeah, so I'm going to read three stories tonight. Two of them are flash, they're really quick, and the first one is also pretty quick. It's like, I think it was 11 minutes when I timed it out. But yeah, so thanks everyone who's listening in, and I really appreciate it. So the first one's called The Burnt Floor. It came out in the Florida Review a while back. Here we go. So The Burnt Floor. Bronsky and Janet saved for 3 years, but could only afford a room on the burnt floor. The hotel was a 15-minute drive from the amusement park, all those lanky spotted mammals behind high fences, the wave-like roller coasters plummeting to frozen peaks. The first two floors were four-star accommodations, the third, 1.5. The room contained two beds, frames scarred black. The ceiling was veined charcoal, the rugs blossoming with scorch marks, black ripples on a white pond. Only one retained its original green and white wallpaper. The rest curled, blackened, exposing pale sheetrock beneath. At least the beds had clean sheets. They looked clean anyway. Vronsky couldn't smell much of anything through the respirator. Each of his kids wore one too, in child sizes. The clear plastic window obscured little Becky's face, dimming her eyes, swallowing her cheeks beneath twin filters. Jeremy was too small. The rubber straps sank into his neck, reddening his pale skin. When they first started planning this vacation years ago, Vronsky and Janet had smiled at each other over the freedom it would bring, the shrugging off of responsibilities and anxieties. But then Janet's hours were reduced and Vronsky's company stopped handing out Christmas bonuses, and by the time they checked the online box for the burnt floor, they were no longer smiling. Jeremy attempted to view the park from their window, but the smoke haze of the pane was too clotted. There was a spot at the corner where a previous guest had tried to scrape away the singed layer with a razor blade. It was the only clear spot, a window within a window. Jeremy bent, removing his respirator, unburdening his irritated skin, pressing his bare cheek to the pane, squinting. Vronsky sprinted to his son's side, snapping the mask back in place. What did we say? He asked. Sorry, Dad, his son replied. You can take it off outside. In here, you've got to be safe. Then Vronsky lowered himself to the small, clear pane, searching for the castles of plastic and synthetic stone, those birthday cake lights strung along turrets, but he could only see his own reflection, framed by that ring of black char. On the first day, they rode the roller coasters. Afterward, little Becky attempted to pet the lanky spotted mammals, a smile painted on her face. Vronsky kept raising her up over his head, helping her get those extra feet. A staff member in a safari hat and cargo shorts scolded them, threatened to have them kicked out, but their family knew something about evasion and bled back into the crowd, an estuary emptying into the open sea. Jeremy said it was the best day of his life, even though he'd thrown up all over himself and Becky after round 3 of roller coastering. Becky agreed as she wrung out her dress over a fountain with a marble shrew at its center. At least it doesn't smell as bad as the room, Becky said after adjusting her sodden outfit. Did you take off the mask? Janet asked, turning on their daughter. They told the kids the same thing that was in the waiver. They signed at the front desk. The rooms were only carcinogenic if the air wasn't filtered. I had to itch my nose, Becky said. Vronsky shook his head, careful to not unseat the animal ears his children forced him to buy. Just don't do it again, all right? Upon returning, they crossed through the immaculately draped entranceway, thick crimson carpet beneath their feet, golden curtains obscuring unblemished windows, the waft of chlorine spilling over from the indoor pool. They passed 2 golden sphinxes on their way to the stairwell. The elevator only went to the second floor. Before they could push open the heavy pneumatic door, a bellhop ran over and sprayed them down with perfumed rose water. The children coughed and wiped at their eyes. Vronsky made sure to hold his breath. The hotel called the practice scent therapy, as if it were for their good of those residing on the burnt floor, rather than the rest of their guests in the world at large. An employee sprayed the concoction whenever their family entered or exited the building, like passing through a car wash. Vronsky held open the stairwell door with one hand, drying his lips with the other. Janet doled out respirators as they climbed. In the early morning, Vronsky woke to what he thought were bird songs. Maybe those swamp crows he'd read about in the guidebooks? After the haze of sleep receded, the noise more closely resembled the sound of his children giggling, the elastic twang of rubber snapping into place over bare flesh. Vronsky sat up, turning to where his 2 children lay in bed. They were still, frozen beneath the sheets, masks possibly askew. It was dark, made all the darker by the burnt sky overhead. Vronsky wondered if it was his fear driving his auditory hallucination, all those whispered jokes from his coworkers about fire-retardant swimwear. The kids were probably fine. Nestling back into his pillow, Vronsky had flashes of what their vacation could have been if there were only more hours in the day, or an 8th day of the week on which to earn overtime. But his company no longer offered overtime, just regular time, and the burnt floor was all they'd ever be able to afford. He tried to push the whispers from his mind. He rolled over and slung an arm around Janet, pulling her close, letting himself believe he'd done right. The next day was more roller coastering. Banks of screams showed the kids as they screamed down log drops, as they screamed at boogeymen who emerged from behind fiberglass crypts, as they screamed as their spaceship fell from orbit. Like everyone else in the park, Janet and Vronsky never purchased the photos, only snapping grainy duplicates with their cell phones. A souvenir was still a souvenir. Vronsky hoped that was the only thing they carried home with them. He started to worry when little Becky began to cough uncontrollably after exiting a Western-themed Hey Hey sing-along cart ride. The cough went on, wet and dry at the same time, harsh to the ear. Too much singing, honey? Janet asked, stooping to Becky's level, pulling her close. They played all my favorite songs, Becky stammered between coughs, a ropey line of snot connecting their shirts in a spiderweb weave. I couldn't help it. You sang beautifully, dear, Janet replied, catching Vronsky's eye, her brows furrowed in concern. Everyone said you had to take the kids to the park before they got too old, before the magic wouldn't be magic. The years weren't slowing. If he had to put off the trip a few more months, he would have had to put it off a few more months after that, and so on and so forth until he found himself crying at songs from their childhood as he dropped little Becky off at college. No, now was the only time, regardless of the money, regardless of the room, regardless of the rash that was spreading around the contours of his mask with a gasket pressed tight to his cheek. The kids deserved their 3 days at the park, and Bronsky deserved those 3 days where he could be present in their lives, not some blur rushing out the door at 5 in the morning, only reappearing after dinner had been cleared from the table. It's a great deal, but not that great, the woman behind the front desk said, a fake smile stretching her cheeks. She toyed with a pen and sketch pad, doodling little caricatures of human faces. But I thought we had access to the pool, Vronsky said, hand on Jeremy's shirtless shoulder, his swim trunks laced tight around his stomach, towel in hand. If you selected the upgrade package, yes, the pool would be all yours, but your reservations say you chose our economy option. Can't you just let us in just this once? No one will notice. Oh, people will definitely notice, but I can bump you up to full access for another $50 a night. This covers the sanitation fees for our third floor guests. Would that work for you? The woman asked, her doodle beginning to resemble Bronsky, his sleep-deprived baggy eyes, the desperate frown carving his face. But we're already paying. Bronsky's reply was cut short by a series of sneezes from Jeremy, followed by a chorus of coughs. His son covered his face with his towel, bending low towards the plush carpets. The fit wouldn't stop. You should probably get that looked at, the woman said, somewhere not right in front of my desk. Bronsky wanted to scream, to tear the notepad from her hand and scribble out the insult of himself etched there, replacing the drawing with his own rendition of the woman and what he thought about her subpar service, but he couldn't ignore Jeremy's distress. Without another word, he steered his son towards the stairwell through the perfumed mist of rose water. We'll just get you into the shower, right, bud? A shower is basically the same thing as a swimming pool. Yeah, just as good, I promise. The third day was less roller coastering, more snapshots of park fixtures, men and women dressed as fairy tale characters, ridiculous confectionery streets, castles that seemed to blot out the sun. Janet wanted to get a shot of their children in front of each landmark. Just put your arms around each other, Janet said, waving her kids together before a man-made waterfall, an animatronic orangutan eternally peeling bananas to their left. Haven't we taken enough pictures? Jeremy asked, his sunburned cheeks glistening, a labored wheeze accompanying the question. The kids had been lethargic since breakfast. There will never be enough pictures, Janet muttered as she snapped the shot, quiet enough only Bronsky could hear. Can we go to the pirate ship again? Becky asked. Yeah, let's do that pirate thing again, Jeremy added, before a skull-rattling sneeze escaped from his mouth and nose. Unlike the day before, a stream of black mucus coated his shirt front, snot mixed with coal dust and char, a river of oil dripping onto the downtown sidewalk. He raised his hands, touching his nose, inspecting the black webbing, eyes growing wider with each second. Then he was screaming, and little Becky was screaming, and Janet was screaming, and a man dressed like a pantless opossum was escorting them to a white-walled service station behind the so-called lollipop factory. A tiny rhino attendant appeared from inside, wiping at Jeremy's face with a towel, mopping up the black mucus, smothering his screams until it faded to whimpers. Staying on the burnt floor, the pantless opossum asked Bronsky, pulling him aside as the rhino gave the children and Janet rainbow-colored lollipops the size of basketballs. How did you? This happens all the time. We have a protocol now, the opossum said as he scratched his distended belly. But the manager said it was safe. Hey, I'm not casting judgment, but I need you and yours out of my cleanup room. We charge by the minute. Are you serious? Don't worry, the lollipops are on the house. Just get going, all right? Bronsky never imagined he'd be intimidated by a giant pantless opossum, but he also never imagined he put his family at risk for a few blurry photos on a water slide and a shot of his kids hugging a stranger dressed like a cute, moderately stoned alien. He thanked the opossum, shook the rhino's hand, then escorted his family back into the sweltering summer sun. The pirate ride no longer held the same appeal. We're leaving, Janet Yell whispered into Bronsky's ear, carting little Becky away towards the parking lot, Jeremy following in a half-daze at their heels, gnawing on his lollipop with sluggish bites. You need to find us somewhere to sleep. Bronsky sighed. I I can do that, he replied, unlocking their rental minivan. The respirators were piled on the back seat, those empty plastic eyes staring back at Bronsky from the upholstery as if he were the world's biggest idiot, as if he'd fallen for the oldest trick in the book. Great deal, real great, he muttered as he pushed the masks onto the floor. making space so Jeremy could stretch out on the seat, the AC breathing down from twin vents in the ceiling. That night, they didn't return to the burnt floor. Instead, Bronsky found a public park, one with a lot of trees. They'd sleep beneath the open sky, the far-off arches of the roller coasters hidden by citrus groves and palms, the fireworks show muted by distance in several freeways. They found a flat stretch of ground far enough from the wetland. All the ponds and rivers in the area had signs warning of alligators, of water snakes, of parasitic fish. Vronsky laid out blankets on a layer of mulch and drying fronds, smoothing out the pointed leaves before his family could take their place. The night sky resembled the charred ceiling in some distant way, the eroding blackness of it. But each breath Vronsky sucked down was light in his lungs, the synthetic plastic replaced by his wife and children's sweat, the fried chicken finger scent clinging to their mouths. Are we going back for our stuff? Jeremy asked, half asleep. I'll go up and get the bags, Vronsky said. That place smelled, Jeremy muttered, tucking his face into his mother's side. Vronsky could almost smell the smoke on the wind, but for the moment the scent of char was far off, a concern for later. He sucked in another lungful of air and lay quiet, listening for something moving in the bushes, something from those warning signs with scales, sharp teeth, mouths that could easily fit a child. He'd stay awake all night if he had to. He'd been careless with his family's safety once before. So that's the first one. I'm making sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. Is the volume and stuff good? We saw it. Sweet. I was just like, I can't look at the chat, so who knows if like they're like, Corey, we can't hear you at all. And 15 minutes later we come to, and I'm just like, oh, good. So story number 2, it's in ergot or ergo. I don't really know exactly how to pronounce it, but I hope that's how it goes. The next one is called Pomegranate, and it's decently different than the first one. Take a drink real quick. So, pomegranates. You wait in line. No, you wait in a line wrapping around the block. People stare at their reflections in the windows of coffee shops, bookstores, and high-end boutiques. It's the same line your friends stood in, the same line depicted in their Instagram stories and TikToks. There are never shots from afterward, no evidence they actually saw the exhibit, just the before. Your hands shake as you near the entrance where a doorman with a clipboard and earpiece stands. You taste the smoothie you had for breakfast, flecks of kale clinging to your tongue. All the doorman says when you near the entrance is, next. Then you are inside. The exhibit contains 6 paintings, each hanging at eye level along a white wall. Only 6 people are allowed in the exhibit at once, 6 feet apart. Before each painting, the hardwood floor is marred with the monk from 1,000 souls fidgeting, shifting subtly as their attention dwindles to a single point. When the final viewer finishes, they exit through a door on the far side of the room, and everyone advances to the next canvas. There is no pause. There is no pause, no prolonged concentration on further details. The line outside never ends, at least not during business hours. You understand the push, the need to funnel viewers efficiently. You stand before the first painting. It is a still life of a silver platter heaped with grapes, a hunk of cheese, and what appears to be a pomegranate. The fruit's exterior is peeled back, exposing nodules and valves of seeds. Something is off about the hue, about the inner contours, but you don't have time to linger. The line moves forward. The next canvas depicts the room in which the silver platter sits. The arrangement rests on a solid wood table, gouged and stained from years of use. The floors are a dark hardwood covered by thick crimson rugs. A brilliant white light comes in through half-curtained windows, competing with the room's dark drapery. In the corner sits a young man wearing a wool jacket, an empty silver platter in his hands, palms slick with red juice. A shucked rind lies bare before him. His gaze is directed at the viewer, the flesh of the fruit caught in his teeth. Then the line advances. You look at the snow-choked landscape of the home that contains the room that contains the platter. It is a small ranch-style house, a single story, front porch, shingles missing from sidewalls, a chimney with a cracked cap. In the background is a ramshackle barn, boards bleached from sun exposure. On the far side, there is a burned-out hole in the roof. The young man trudges from the back door to the barn, tracing a well-worn path through the snow. A week's worth of footprints guide his step. You try to look at his hands, to focus on the coloration, but the line shifts and you are forced to stumble on. This is a painting of the barn door. thick wooden planks etched with termite tunnels, nails loosening their hold. Holes give way to the interior, but they're too dark to see through. The young man reaches for the handle, his palm still a glistening crimson. You feel an urge to leave this painting more quickly than the rest, but the line has halted. The man at the final viewing station is shaking and refuses to move forward until a doorman opens the exit and gestures onward. The viewer refuses. The doorman grabs him by his shoulders and guides him outside. There is no further disruption. The second to last canvas depicts the inside of the barn, windows high in the warped walls, stalls cast in shadow. Most of the pen doors hang loose, gaping onto a central aisle. The floor is covered in moldering hay. The young man is halfway down the aisle, approaching the only occupied stall. Something large lingers directly beneath the hole in the roof. It might be a cow or a boar or a sheep, but there are more heads and hooves than there should be. There's something plant-like in its articulation. The single spot of an eye peers out from the symbiosis of flora and fauna. You aren't sure if it's alive or dead or somewhere in between. Then you are at the last canvas, your own sweat nauseating, the smoothie taste replaced by an acidic tang beneath your tongue. This painting is nearly identical to the third, a landscape of the barn and the house and snow and calf. The young man has closed the barn door. Splotches of crimson mar the white ground behind him. He holds another silver platter, on it another pomegranate, its flesh wet and dripping. A line of liquid has sloshed over the platter's lip, staining the young man's shoe. His mouth is open, chewing on itself in hunger. The exit door opens. The man holding it calls to you, but you can't quite catch his words. You want to leave, but something holds you in place. You want to go back, to trace your path again, to understand what the young man has just done, but you're being called to go. You have never been good at ignoring directions. When you step into the alleyway leading from the gallery, the man at the door hands you what appears to be a pomegranate, cut in half from a silver platter perched on a collapsible table. Its juices run over your palm, dripping onto the asphalt. The man doesn't tell you to eat, but you know there's never been another choice. So that's that one. Hope you liked it. And then the final one, shifting gears to another like parent story. I didn't realize I was doing two parent stories until this moment, but they're two parent stories. This is called Fences and Full Moons, and it's in Flash Fiction Online. I'm gonna have another sip of water before I get going because I keep forgetting to do that. Now I am fully hydrated. So this one's called Fences and Full Moons. They'd accepted that Leo was a werewolf, invested in the thick steel chains, silver jewelry, and poured cement kennel. His father, Clark, watched 57 YouTube videos from other parents discussing building techniques, how to sink footings deep, wrap fencing beneath the structure, wire a solar array on the kennel's roof to generate electricity. He wanted his son to have the best of the best, despite the backaches and the scars on his knuckles. He'd never been handy before the symptoms manifested. The kennel had done its job for 15 cycles before Leo got out and ate the chickens. It was a small flock, only enough to supply their family with eggs for breakfasts, nothing for the farm stand Clark and his wife, Val, dreamed of adding to the front lawn. Leo finally pried apart the gate, tore through the padlocks, and ignored the jolt from the electrified fence. Maybe a moat would have been better, Clark said, welding the gate back in place. What if I drown? Leo asked at his elbow. Leo was in fourth grade, hair sheared into a bowl cut, front teeth coming crowded. He was short for his age, a fact his classmates never failed to mention at recess. Clark joked about them saying that to him on a full moon, but Val said he needed to stop talking like that. He wasn't trying to encourage violence, only to let Leo know he wasn't helpless. Did you ever see a dog that couldn't swim? Clark asked, swinging the patchwork door into place, rattling the locks. No, Leo replied. Then I think a werewolf would be fine. So I'd swim across? Yeah, I guess that defeats the purpose. Sorry, Dad, Leo said, toying with the butterfly net his mother gave him that morning, trying to get the boy's mind off the feathers stuck in his teeth. He loved insects, beetles, grasshoppers, butterflies, moths, and stick bugs distracted him from the crimson smears Val washed out of the grass. All the blood pooled in the kennel. More locks it is, Clark said, satisfied with his handiwork. You remember anything from last night? Not much, Leo replied. What do you remember? Clark asked, walking into the enclosure, sidestepping the water trough fed from a rain barrel. He prodded the stainless mattress with his foot, leaned close to sniff for mold. The waterproof pillow top was a steep buy. They'd put it on the credit card, despite ridiculous interest rates. Clark could go without takeout lunches during his post office shifts for the next few months for the sake of Leo's sleeping habits. Nothing, Leo said, not meeting his father's eye. Clark knew his son's memory didn't shut off when the moon was full, but he wouldn't push him on the matter. They had enough to deal with without adding another layer to the equation. 2 more nights of transitions lay ahead. The locks held the first night. Then the shearing of metal on metal swept Clark from dreams. Through their second-story window, he saw Leo, teeth bared, snout nosing through the welded patch on the kennel door, metal bent out of shape. One paw passed through, then the other, tearing at the ground on the other side, fighting to drag his narrow hips through the opening. Clark descended the steps 2 at a time, pulling his flannel jacket on as he pushed open the screen door. The night was chill, the feel of rain in the air, grass slicked with dew. He nearly lost his footing as he lunged for his son, Leo slipping from the kennel, bounding towards the tree line on the far side of the yard. You need to calm down, Clark whispered into his son's pointed ear, arms locked around his body as Leo's jaws snapped about his face, wet and sharp, never finding purchase. As the two struggled in the grass, claws dragging blood from exposed skin, Clark could see the years stretching away from them. He'd read about teenage werewolves, the added strength, the lust, the taste for larger, more intelligent prey. Every month, the struggle would get worse. They need thicker fencing, higher voltage wire, ropes and chains that would never be easy to secure. Clark could only use his arms as restraints for so long. That would be his reality, month after month. The tree line wasn't far off. Acres of dense deciduous forest ran for miles. Clark could ease his hold, let Leo sprint for the woods. They were vast enough to swallow anything, never spit it back out. It would be easy, a release, a push, a reset. Val would never know if it was intentional or not. He loosened his grip, but tightened it before Leo could gain purchase. That wasn't what Clark wanted. He twisted onto his back, arm clamping Leo's jaw in an improvised headlock. Leo whimpered, hot breath drifting from his nostrils. Clark wasn't going to abandon his child to the wilderness, to the wild voices swelling in his throat. There were training techniques he'd read about, methods of containment, werewolf mindfulness, a way to press rage down inside Leo so he could actually use the mattress they'd spent all that money on, instead of dragging bleeding livestock beneath the roof beams. Clark heaved, lifting Leo's sprawling body into the kennel. He couldn't repatch the fence, not that night. Instead, Clark carried Leo to the bed, sitting, leaning back against the fencing. Lupine muscles slowly eased into Clark's embrace, fight fleeing. The sun would rise in several hours. Clark could wait until then, until his son morphed back into the pale boy with the bowl cut, the boy whose hunger was no longer insatiable. And that's it. That's all the stories. Thanks for listening.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for showing us the breadth of what you write. That was wonderful. All 3 of them were wonderful, and they were all so different.
Thank you.
It is our way at Story Hour to just take a break between the 2 readers just for a moment. Let the first stories settle in. Make room for another. Everyone, that was Corey Farrenkopf. Thank you so much, Corey. Please do come read for us again. Next up, we have someone who we have asked to come read for us again. I think this is the 3rd time now that they've been back. The 2nd? What? I meant to ask another time, I'm sure. M. Shaw writes fiction, poetry, and the odd piece of creative nonfiction. Their novella, One Hand to Hold, One Hand to Carve, from Tenebris Press, received the 2022 Wonderland Book Award and made the preliminary ballot for the Bram Stoker Award. Their short story collection, All Your Friends Are Here, which includes the story being read today, is forthcoming in fall 2024, also from Tenebris Press. They are a 2019 graduate of the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop, as well as a past organizer of the Denver Mercury Poetry Slam. Their website is mshawsome.com. They live in Arvada, Colorado. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for dealing with how geriatric my webcam on this computer has become. It sounds like you can hear me okay, so that's good. And big thank you to Corey for those first 3 stories. I'm a big nerd about stuff like Disneyland and how Disney has worked so hard to like make it really easy to infringe on their copyright, but in the process they've become so ubiquitous that there's really like very few hints that you need to drop in order to make people understand that you're talking about Disneyland. And it's a lot of fun. Anyway, I'm going to read a story, as Laura said, from my forthcoming collection, All Your Friends Are Here. A lot of the short stories I write have like get into like some deeply philosophical business or like have a political angle to them. This isn't that. This is much more a story that I kind of wrote for the teenage version of myself who imprinted on the 90s incarnation of Weird Tales magazine back in the day. That said, it does bear content warnings for references to alcohol abuse, family estrangement, and genital mutilation. So if any of those is going to give you a bad trip, you've been warned. The sun must have been down about an hour, but we were nowhere near giving up. We held the line, swept the mountains sector by sector, sucking in breath after breath of frigid, pine-scented air, and expelling it, warm, bearing the missing hiker's name. We all had work the next day, but October was still shoulder season, so at least there wouldn't be tourists pounding on the door of every business in town first thing. The hiker was an out-of-towner. None of us were clued into what their business was here. They hadn't brought skis or a mountain bike, not that either of them would be much use this time of year anyway. They'd come alone. If Carla Jeffries, who owned the B&B, weren't such a busybody, then we might have never known they were gone. The group I was with swept uphill along the South Ridge. The ridge flattened out halfway to the peak, but the trees only got thicker from there to the tree line. It was in that dense part of the woods that someone's flashlight beam caught a human shape. Janice blew the whistle to call a halt, and we ran toward the sound. When I reached the spot, we were looking at the backside of a fully naked man pressed against the trunk of a cottonwood tree. At first, we assumed it was the hiker, but then our lights found another person in a similarly compromised position. Then another, and another, and another. There were 14 at my count, and not a scrap of clothing on a single one. Janice got on the radio while the rest of us stood speechless and staring, and told the other teams that the whistle had been a false alarm, probably for the best. Some of those other teams had high school kids on them. One by one, the naked men and women noticed our presence and turned to face us. Their fronts were covered with dirt and quite a few freely bleeding cuts and scrapes. "Who's got the first aid kit?" I called out. No one responded, but to be fair, no one had probably expected me to volunteer for the search party. I hadn't exactly been high functioning for the past 20 years, ever since my wife died and our little girl Hannah, who was 5 at the time, started spending more time with her imaginary friend than her drunk, depressed dad who talked about her dead mom nonstop. Talked to her dead mom nonstop on the worst days. But this was the year I'd finally convinced Hannah to come back from the West Coast for a Thanksgiving visit, and I guess that lit a fire in me when it came to finding lost people. Still, it was my 4th or 5th recovery attempt, so I couldn't blame anyone for being a little wary. One of the naked men approached us. The other nudists, I guess, kept their eyes so focused on him that it almost looked like they didn't see us at all. The man wasn't familiar, certainly not from town. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Personally, I wasn't sure it was even advisable to talk to these people, much less answer their questions. Being part of a search party was an unusual enough situation. Throw in whatever this was, and a guy could be forgiven for not knowing what to do. "We're looking for a lost hiker," said Janice. I see, said the naked man. Well, none of us is a lost hiker. And what are you doing out here? Said Janice. Do you maybe want to put some clothes on? Dave Cleary added. The naked man ignored Dave. If it's any of your business, we were in the middle of an orgy. Jeez Louise, said Dave. Most of us were saying something to that effect, but Dave was standing closest to me. An orgy, said Janice. Roots in the ground, said the naked man, as if this clarified anything. I swept my flashlight beam between the bodies present. Most were middle-aged and looked exactly like the kind of people you'd expect to populate a town like ours, though none of them did. I don't recognize any of you, I said. That doesn't surprise me, said the naked man, who at least was willing to acknowledge that I had said anything. Look, your hiker isn't here, so... He shrugged, hands held palm up, an almost cartoonish gesture. Would you mind? Just a moment, said Janice, signaling for us clothed people to huddle together. Ann Borden spoke first. He did say they were having an orgy, right? It's below freezing out here, said Dave. Their nipples have got to be hard enough to cut glass, said Ted Furrier. Thank you, Ted, said Janice. Thank you for that contribution. Anybody here replacing a window pane tonight? She didn't wait for an answer. How do y'all suggest we handle this? I don't know what the hell's going on, but if we leave them here, there'll be a dozen popsicles covered in infected gashes by morning. Something's not right about this, said Ted. That's all I'm saying. A few of us cleared our throats. There was a whole host of not right here things about this, but what could we do? Even if they wanted our help, there were only 3 survival blankets in the first aid kit. Fuck it, said Dave. Why don't we leave them? Freezing or not, I don't want nothing to do with whatever this is. I mean, not that I'm well acquainted with these things, but doesn't an orgy normally involve, you know... He made an O with his thumb and forefinger, then poked his other forefinger through the hole. Fucking, said Ted. Exactly. What kind of orgy is this? They're just rubbing themselves on the trees, looks like. The way they're all scratched up, said Dave. They trying to diddle the trees? I pointed my flashlight back toward the nudists, guessing maybe I could do some forensic shit on their wounds. I'm not a CSI, I just watch too much TV. Hold up, I said. Look. Our lights lit the trees. 14 naked bodies had been reduced to just a few stragglers, weaving between the trees away from us, up the slope. I guess that's that, said Dave. Ted must not have been listening because he took off after the fleeing nudists, followed by Anne and a few others. Do not, said Janice. Hey! Hey! Fucking hell. Good riddance, I say, said Dave. I mean the weirdos, not our folks. Should we follow? I asked. Absolutely not, said Janice. We stick with the plan, keep sweeping our grid. They're in front of us, so eventually either we'll run into them or another team will. Provided no one else wants to do anything astonishingly stupid. We reformed the line, spaced appropriately farther apart to account for the deserters. We kept calling for the missing hiker, but it's safe to say that was no longer the first thing on my mind. I kept thinking about the way they'd all stood there, stark naked and bleeding in the cold, like they weren't the least bit uncomfortable. As we poked through the woods, I kept looking for any discarded garments left behind, but never saw a single one. Had they somehow grabbed all their clothes as they ran, or had they never had any? Either way, where the hell had they come from, and where the hell were they going? All I knew for sure was how I felt, which was that I wanted to get myself off that mountain and not look back. I told myself it was just my old chicken shit depression trying to give me an excuse to cloister myself at home and avoid the world, and that I should push on like an adult instead. Despite what the horror movies of the 1970s would have us believe, a bunch of naked hippies in the woods probably aren't planning a satanic murder party, no matter how scary they look. I tried to go back to thinking about Hannah, how I'd tell this story to her in a few weeks. Oddly enough, I found this making me feel more uneasy, not less. I'd lost track of how much time had passed when Dave tripped on a root and busted his nose. Janice called a halt so we could check him out, stick some gauze in his nostrils, and bandage his ankle. How you feeling? I asked him, pressing the ends of a strip of surgical tape against his cheekbones. A little dizzy, he said. Dave was in pretty good shape for his age, but still forging well into his 60s. Thankfully, he didn't object when Janice drew the line and said they wouldn't continue to search until he headed back to town. You know the way? She said. Dave mumbled something that might have been yeah, but it was really more like yeah, which just as easily could have been nah. I'll make sure he gets there okay, I said. Oh, come on, said Dave, shooting me a knitted brows look that strongly implied, seriously? You, of all people, are going to look after me? You stick with the group, I'll do fine on my own. Yeah, I know all about doing fine on your own, I said. Dave shrugged, which was as good as I was going to do. I didn't make the connection at the time, but when Hannah was little, she had this song about trees. As far as anyone could tell, she'd made it up. It was cute, kind of like a love song to a tree, as if it were a close friend or maybe a boyfriend. The kind of thing kids come up with when they're still figuring out how to process feelings like affection and attachment. The title of the song was Roots in the Ground. The lyrics changed over time along with the artist, but the chorus was always that phrase repeated 8 times at increasing volume. The last roots in the ground was a scream. It was cute. Janice swore the group would be fine without us, even considering they were down by almost half between this and the ones running after the nudists. She pointed out they'd be getting those folks back, hopefully before too long. I didn't say so to anyone, but I was glad for the excuse to hike back down with Dave. Something the naked man said had plucked a chord in me that hadn't been plucked in a long time, and not a pleasant one. I was ready to give in to my chicken shit depression by that point. I had thoughts milling around in my head that I didn't want to be there, and the sooner I could get home, eat a gummy, and watch some stupid TV show, the better. Dave found a walking stick before long and insisted it was all the support he needed. We hiked on in silence. I made sure to keep myself busy, sweeping my flashlight in all directions, still looking for our hiker because it was better than thinking about something else, like why those people had looked so familiar, even though I couldn't identify a single one of them. We were still the better part of an hour from the base area, probably more considering that one of us was in hobbling shape. The cold wasn't doing us any favors either. At least we were well outside of rattlesnake season. That being the case, one could imagine my surprise when I heard something off in the trees that sounded very much like a rattlesnake. Dave stopped in his tracks the same moment I did, so he must have heard it too. A moment later, it came again, that crisp, cascading shudder. Unmistakable. You gotta be kidding me, said Dave. What now? It took a minute for me to get my light on it, far back in the trees as it was. Faint movement. Not a snake. Even from a distance, I could tell I was looking at skin, not scales. I think it's a person, I said. Jiminy Christmas, said Dave. I kept my light trained on the source of the sound and started toward it, cautioning Dave to watch his step. It was one of the nudists from before, or so I assumed given her lack of clothing and prominence of wounds. How she had doubled back and passed us without our noticing was beyond me, but it was either that or there were multiple tree orgies going on that night, which I didn't want to entertain. She looked in even worse shape than before. There were trails of blood running out of her ears and nostrils. The rattling noise came from her heaving breath, passing through all the blood in her mouth, which visibly bubbled and sputtered on each exhale. Trembling hands held a stick that she was working back and forth over her privates. Most of her fingernails were torn off. Her skin had gone from bright red from the cold, with the exception of her feet, which were blue, fading into black. I'm out, said Dave. Hold up, I said, but when I turned, all I found was his back as he fumbled his way out of the trees. Too old for this shit, he called back. So he said, but the woman on the ground couldn't have been much younger than him. A large and vocal part of my brain wanted me to leave her for dead right then, which I ignored. Unsettling though it was to stay there, I knew that any future reports of her death from exposure would be on my conscience. She still wasn't doing anything besides rubbing herself with the stick and making that god-awful rattle. It had an audible wheeze underneath, I was noticing. Dave might have been out of earshot, but I tried. You better make it back to town, asshole. You get lost, that's on you. No response. Just the sound of breath pushed through a mouthful of blood. I didn't have any supplies on me beyond the flashlight and my phone. I could call 911, but who would they send? All the first responders in town were already on the mountain, and Dave had taken our radio. There was no way the woman would be able to walk on those feet, given that they were starting to resemble overripe eggplants in shape and color. I knelt by her and shone my light on her face. Confirmed, I had absolutely no idea who she was. Like her compatriots, though, looking at her gave me the oddest feeling that she should be familiar. Her pupils, which had been dilated across the entire iris, shrank to pinpricks when the light hit them. No reaction otherwise. "Hey," I said, "can you hear me? Can you sit up?" She coughed. Blood from her mouth spattered across my face. "Jesus!" I shot to my feet, wiping desperately at the blood with the sleeve of my Carhartt. Something came out of her throat which sounded like either pained retching or the word almost or both. Then, more clearly, "Please, please, it must be enough." I stood over her again, making sure to keep my face a good distance from hers. Blood had splashed onto her chin and chest as well, enough that it was already forming rivulets. I took a step toward her and my foot sank into the ground, almost to the ankle before I yanked it back. All around her, the dirt felt soft, damp. I smelled something rotten, which could have been the blood drying on my face, but reminded me more of dead leaves. The best solution I could see here was to put my coat on her and carry her piggyback into town as fast as I could. Getting her onto my back would be complicated, and there was the concern about her coughing blood on me again, but what the hell? I slid a hand under her shoulder and started to lift. "No!" she screamed. I stumbled and fell backward. Her eyes wrenched sideways in my direction, though when I shone my light on her face, they looked cloudy, staring into the distance. My ass stayed firmly planted on a pile of pine needles. "Got separated." Her voice was a deep, witchy croak. She burned through words like they were holding her up. "When we ran, lost the sheltering, but I'm so close." My hands groped behind me, searching for anything that might impede my scooting backward while I kept eyes on her. I realized as I was doing this that I had ceased to feel much of anything other than fear. My whole body was swimming with adrenaline, and it felt so terrifyingly peaceful. I wasn't even cold anymore. "Please," she said again, followed by something that was either gagging or a word made up entirely of vowels. "I accept your embrace. Please." Her entire face contracted, except for her mouth, which shot open. Her back arched. Either she was having a seizure or that knobbly old stick was really doing something for her. Blood pushed itself from every open wound, dark and halfway clotted. If that was all I'd seen, it would have been enough. I could have stood at that moment and booked it into town and left her to the frozen woods. I've still got enough cowardice in me for that. But I didn't. God help me. Here's the thing. Kids say creepy shit all the time, especially when they're little. All the more so when there's a dead parent involved. It's normal. It's healthy, or so the shrink said. Hannah's imaginary friend showed up about as soon as she was old enough to talk, but their relationship shifted into new gear when her mom died. This made perfect sense to me. It also made sense that the imaginary friend in question was a bit morbid. Rudy, as she called it, not him, was made of nothing. She would get really mad if you tried to ask what Rudy looked like. One time she cried because her first grade teacher said Rudy doesn't look like anything, which she insisted was not at all the same thing as looking like nothing. If you said anything about Rudy that she didn't like, she'd stomp out of the room and scream that she was going to the sheltering, which I assumed was where Rudy lived, probably a word she'd heard on some cartoon. If you asked her what Rudy did with its time, you'd learn that it ate sticks, dead leaves, and animal bones. Its favorite activity was gardening, but if you asked for clarification, then it turned out this involved burying things, seeds, toys, dead animals, or anything else, and growing them back as trees. Rudy's penis was also a tree, which got Hannah into trouble at school on multiple occasions. The funnest aspect of the penis thing was that it wasn't connected to Rudy's body, and it didn't stay in one location. It could be any tree anywhere on the mountain. Rudy didn't like us for living on the mountain, but it didn't want us to leave either. You can see where we assumed that this was all about her mom's death. The fixation with burial, with things that were dead and rotting, the central importance of someone being nothing and yet all around you at once. Almost too easy to analyze, and I wasn't even the psychologist. Like all imaginary friends, Rudy went away after a while. She might have hung on to it a bit longer than most kids, but again, that was understandable. Her friendship with Rudy could even be cute at times, although no one was exactly sorry to see it go. After that night on the mountain, I wasn't so sure it had. The woman fell limp, letting out a sigh like wind in a blizzard. Then something settled on top of her. It was more like the lack of something, really. All the light was sucked out of the space just above her body. It was the kind of darkness so thick that it seems to have its own substance beyond mere absence of light. At the same time, looking at it hurt my eyes like looking at a bare light bulb, like looking at the sun. When I pointed my flashlight at her, it showed nothing. The thing on top of her refused to be illuminated, beyond a light shimmer at its edges where the light was devoured. There was a heavy creaking sound, and the ground beneath her receded, as if it were simply falling away into nothing. She sunk into the dirt, and with the darkness on top of her, it looked almost like she dissolved. Then everything was quiet. When I stood, my vision had gone fuzzy. I didn't feel weak or tired, but my strength was gone. Moving felt more like operating a puppet. My vision warped and crackled around the periphery. I looked into the hole in the ground where the woman had been. A few inches below the edge was a thick latticework of roots. Couldn't see anything past that. I thought, huh. Then I turned and started walking. Next thing I remember, I was back home. I slept on it, multiple nights, in fact. Let it never be said that cutting my daughter out of my life forever was something I did on impulse. After what happened in the ensuing days, I had to harden my heart. I had to keep her away from the mountain. They never found the missing hiker. By the next morning, most folks didn't remember there ever was a missing hiker, and the ones who did talked about the search in distant terms, like something that happened years ago. They never found any of the nudists either. As far as I can tell, I'm the only one who remembers them at all. I've learned not to bring it up. Dave Cleary never made it back to town, nor did any of the folks who chased after the nudists. No one responded. No one reported them missing. To this day, all you'll get in return for asking about them will be comments about the weather. Nothing prepares you for hearing your daughter's voice while knowing it's the last time. I've heard you can tell by someone's voice on the phone when they're smiling, even though you can't see them. I don't know if that's true, but Hannah's voice did sound different to me on that call, and I like to remember her smiling. Hey, Dad, what's up? Hi, Hannah. Just wanted to check in, see if you're still thinking of coming home for Thanksgiving. A chuckle with just a hint of annoyance. Well, like I said, home is Oakland. I'm coming to visit for Thanksgiving. That's real good, sweetie, just making sure. You know, we've missed you all these years. We? Your mother and I are really looking forward to having you back. Silence on the line. Dad, what the fuck? I know it hasn't been too long, but we still talk about you every night at dinner. Dad, quit. You promised you wouldn't. Sorry, what did we promise? Maybe you told Mom, but I can't remember. I'll get her on the phone real quick. Her voice changed again, and this time she definitely wasn't smiling. I already bought the fucking plane ticket. Great, we'll meet you at security. A long, wet sniff. I can't do this. Click. I can't picture Dave Cleary's face anymore. I can barely remember what Hannah's mom looked like, and her name is gone. Everyone gone is fading, like an imaginary friend. But not Hannah. I remember every day I spent with her, even if most of them weren't great. The pain of it bites deep as ever. That's how I know she's safe. I don't leave the house much anymore. Most folks assume I'm lapsing back into my old ways, probably over Hannah canceling her visit. They don't know it's because I can feel the trees watching me out there, both of us waiting patiently for the mountain and whatever's under it to wrap me in pine and take me in. The end.
And that was so creepy. Oh, amazing though. Wow. Parents had a really hard time in these stories tonight, didn't they? Hmm. Wow. Both of you tonight. This is just amazing.
Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. And you are going to come back, right? Next time it'll be the third time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not good at counting, but I have excellent taste in fiction.
You do. I agree. I mean, you co-host this with Daniel Marcus, so.
Right. Gotta love Daniel Marcus. He's out sick today, but he will be. Oh, he'll be back. Faster, stronger, better than before. But I'll still be here next week. And next week, our readers are Jose Pablo Iriarte and Adina Mignona. I also recommend checking storyhour2020.com the day of the reading in case there are any changes, because if there are any, that's where they'll go. We're also on Blue Sky, so you can follow Story Hour on Blue Sky for news. And storyhour2020.com is also a great place to learn about upcoming authors. Just find out who's next on the calendar. But, you know, if you can't get a Wednesday off, because sometimes it's hard, maybe it's not the right time of day for you, you know, we do record all of these. So you can watch any of the programs you've missed on Facebook on the Story Hour page. You can watch this one as many times as you want, and no one will stop you. No one. Corey Farrenkopf, M. Shaw, thank you both so much for reading it for us tonight. This was a hair-raising evening of stories, and I really do mean that as a compliment. Truly, I do. My hair was black before this started. I'd also like to thank my co-host Daniel Marcus, without whom we would have no Story Hour. And to thank all of you who are here in the Zoom tonight, all of you watching on Facebook tonight, and all of you watching at some point in the future. Because as long as you watch these stories, as long as you're learning them and listening to them and bringing them inside you like some kind of creepy root thing, I don't know. As long as we're all here with the stories, we're all in the same story. Good night.